At home and abroad, Britain dramatically ups the ante against Ebola. Troops and helicopters are shipped to Sierra Leone to help curb the epidemic. And 3 more hospitals here are put on alert in case that effort fails.
Our first priority as the government is to make sure that the British people are safe. It is now entirely possible that someone with Ebola will come to the UK.
Also on the programme, Clegg bids for another spell in power but pours scorn on both his likely coalition partners.
A new nuclear power station will rise at Hinkley, but a warning, your electricity prices will as well.
And the boss of NASA tells ITV News he expects to put a Brit on Mars.
This is ITV News at 6:30 with Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Britain is sending 750 troops, a medical support ship and helicopters to assist the effort in West Africa to curb the Ebola virus. It has killed thousands there and now threatens Europe. The Health Secretary warned it is now entirely possible someone with Ebola virus will come to the UK. More hospitals have been put on standby.
Here, the Foreign Secretary said it is now all about preventing a crisis from becoming a catastrophe. The United States insisted the world must do more after the death of its first Ebola victim. Paul Davis has our first report.
Heading for a very different front line, but one every bit as deadly as anything they've faced before. As army medics practice skills they'll soon be using in Sierra Leone, the government announced that the hospital ship RFA Argus and 750 military personnel are being sent to West Africa. Their brief to help contain the spread of Ebola. The deployment was ordered after a meeting of the Emergency Committee COBRA chaired by the Prime Minister had evaluated the risk the disease now poses to the world and Britain.
The most important thing we can do to protect the UK population is to play our part in making sure that the disease is contained in West Africa. That's why RFA Argus is going to be moored off the coast of Sierra Leone. 3 helicopters will be based on the ship, and that will help us to help equip and build up 700 beds in 5 different field hospitals that will treat nearly 9,000 people.
There is a home front to this battle too, and this is it. The Royal Liverpool University Hospital, one of 4 specialist units on standby. Doctors believe with modern air travel, it's inevitable Ebola will come to Britain.
Sooner or later somebody is going to come to the UK with Ebola. But the important thing is that we're ready to deal with it. We know what we're looking out for, and we know how to look after somebody if this happens.
Sheffield's Royal Hallamshire is another hospital ready if London's Royal Free, first call for suspected Ebola cases, can't cope.
If somebody was confirmed to have Ebola and was a patient in this unit, we would be able to look after them and not have any spread to anybody either looking after the patient here or elsewhere, whether in the hospital or out in Sheffield.
They hope they won't be needed, but if a traveller brings Ebola here, the health service believes the emergency can be handled without threatening staff or the public. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Well, as Britain stepped up its response, so too did the United States after news of the first Ebola death there today. It issued an urgent global appeal for action. In a moment, we'll have more from the Ministry of Defence here. But first, to our Washington correspondent, Robert Moore, who, as you can see, is live there in Washington for us. Robert, how worried are the US authorities?
Oh, the death of Mr. Duncan has certainly shaken the medical community, not just in Dallas, but right across the United States. Perhaps there was some complacency before, but Alistair, there certainly is not now. Remember, Mr. Duncan was completely misdiagnosed and sent home. A lesson in how even the most sophisticated health system can make some pretty elementary mistakes. Certainly this concern is now shared at the highest levels of government. I've just returned from a press conference held by John Kerry, the US Secretary of State. We expected it to be focused on Syria. Instead, he was most passionate and certainly most alarmed by the threat of Ebola.
And we need people to step up now. Now is the time for action, not words. And frankly, there is not a moment to waste in this effort.
Well, certainly reflecting that concern, new countermeasures are being put in place. There's going to be temperature screening of all passengers coming in from West Africa, initially just at 5 US airports, though. New protocols are being put in place. Almost every hospital in the country is now practicing some drills. Really a recognition that in this age of global travel, this is a very significant challenge indeed.
Robert, thank you.
Well, the World Health Organization said tonight there is no evidence the Ebola outbreak in West Africa is being brought under control. Officially, 3,800 people have now died. Our correspondent Dan Rivers is at the Ministry of Defence for us now. Dan, what can we read into the deployment of British troops to West Africa?
Well, clearly they're getting the message from the UN and other aid agencies that something really has to change, that this has to scale up dramatically if this is to be stopped from spreading to other developing parts of the world, which is, in the words of one doctor we spoke to today, the nightmare scenario. So twin track approach really. In West Africa, as you've heard, 750 personnel will be deployed, 250 aboard that ship with 3 Merlin helicopters, 200 more helping to run and staff a WHO training facility to make sure doctors know what they're doing there, and 300 military personnel to help the Sierra Leone government on top of the 40 who are already there building facilities. In the UK, the other side of this coin, well, they're looking at a national exercise, increased resilience training, putting up posters at UK airports, for example, getting the message out to the experts and the general public to be on the lookout for Ebola, that it could be coming here.
All right, Dan Rivers at the MOD, thank you.
Questions are still being asked in Spain tonight about why a nurse who contracted Ebola in Madrid wasn't diagnosed sooner. Teresa Romero caught it after treating a patient. She says she told doctors 3 times that she had a fever before eventually being placed in quarantine. From Madrid, Neil Connery with the latest.
Anger on Madrid streets. The authorities' handling of this Ebola crisis under attack. These protesters dragged by police from the block where the infected nurse and her husband lived. They were trying to stop the couple's dog from being put down by officials. But as the world beyond looks on, it's the bigger picture here that's giving serious concern. The nurse, Teresa Romero Ramos, seen here with the dog, says she may have been infected by touching her face with a glove as she changed her protective clothing. Ana Gomez, a friend of the nurse, told me she's no faith in the government's response. The people are afraid and angry because they don't know anything about this illness or what's happening here. According to her union, the nurse sought help 3 times over a week before she was tested for Ebola. Last Tuesday, she reported a fever, but was told to take paracetamol. She rang the hospital again on Thursday, but no action was taken. When she rang again on Monday, she was told to go to a local hospital, where she was kept on a public ward, behind only a fabric screen and some tape. Only when her Ebola test came back positive was she finally transported to the Carlos III. There's a deep sense of mistrust here at how the authorities are handling this crisis. Aside from the medical efforts to contain this outbreak, regaining the public's faith in the coming hours and days is going to prove crucial. Today, the Spanish Prime Minister boasted the country's health system is one of the best in the world. Back in the suburban block where the infected nurse and her husband lived, the residents may beg to differ. Neil Connery, ITV News, Madrid.
Here, Nick Clegg took aim at his political rivals today, shooting down Labour, the Tories, UKIP and the SNP in his closing speech at the Liberal Democrat conference. It was a pitch for power in any future coalition, with a serious policy message too, that improving mental health care will be a top priority. From Glasgow, our political editor Tom Bradby reports.
Put simply, Nick Clegg is a politician down on his luck, determined today to show he has some fight left in him. There is disillusionment out there, he said he gets it, but the corrosive cynicism would come to no good.
Something very un-British is taking root in our politics. A growing movement of people who want to pull us apart. Salmond, Farage, Worried about your job, your business, your children's future, your way of life? No matter. Just blame Europe, Brussels, foreigners, immigrants, the English, the South, professional politicians, Westminster, big business, anyone claiming benefits, even onshore wind farms.
People blamed him and his party. He said he understood that for tuition fees and the things they'd got wrong. But bear in mind, please, the tax cuts and the cash put into early school education and much else besides, he said.
So when you meet people who still aren't sure about us, ask them this: how will you judge us? By the one policy we couldn't deliver in government, or by the countless policies we did deliver in government?
He remains confident of his prospects on the centre ground of British politics. Ed Miliband on the economy, he said, simply not a credible proposition.
Ed Miliband, you might have forgotten what you did to our economy, but we have not. And the British people don't want a Labour government running their country, racking up debts for our children and grandchildren to pay.
But he reserved his real venom for his Tory coalition partners.
David Cameron, you can copy our ideas, but you will never imitate our values. And the British people don't want a Conservative government running their country which only looks after its own kind.
He and his party had different priorities, he said, such as helping those with mental health issues.
This morning I announced that next year, for the first time ever, we will introduce national waiting times for patients with mental health conditions. Labour introduced waiting times in physical health. We will do the same for the many people struggling with conditions that you often can't see, that we often don't talk about, but which are just as serious. I can tell you now, I want this smack bang on the front page of our next manifesto.
Nick Clegg had one mission here, which was to get a new hearing. He thinks his MPs are dug in well and may do better than some expect. But no one in this hall doubts the scale of the challenge they face. Tom Bradby, ITV News in Glasgow.
America led a new round of airstrikes against Islamic State fighters in Syria today as the battle for the border town of Kobani rages on. The strikes hit armoured vehicles and artillery belonging to the militants. The town is being defended on the ground by Kurdish forces, who said today the airstrikes had succeeded in pushing Islamic State back.
A South African court heard today from the man who claims he was hired by British businessman Dewani to kill his new wife on honeymoon.
He claims he was paid around £1,300 to make the murder look like a botched carjacking. Our Africa correspondent Rohit Katru heard his evidence in Cape Town.
Dewani was driven from court tonight, staring ahead from the back seat of the car that brought him back to his psychiatric hospital. It was a second punishing day for the family of his late wife, brought face to face with the hitman convicted of her murder. This is Mziwa Madodo Kwabe on the day he admitted what he'd done. Today he was in court again, but to testify against the man he says commissioned the killing. The lavish honeymoon followed an opulent wedding, but despite the image of perfection, prosecutors say Mr. Dewani murdered his new bride a few days after he married her. Kwabe said he was hired by a middleman who told him there was a husband who wanted his wife to be killed, and he would be killed and it needed to look like a hijacking. Nothing would happen to the husband. The shot was fired when the car was in motion. I just decided to stop. I had quick glances at the wife. She was in the back seat. On Monday, Dewani revealed that he is bisexual. Today, prosecutors began to explain why that detail matters. Documents show that he was a member of a gay dating website, Gaydar, and that his computer was logged in at the time he and his wife were travelling to their honeymoon, and again less than 24 hours after her body was found. As he sat facing the witness, Mr. Dewani looked agitated, distressed at one point, and as he was led away, one of his relatives began sobbing at the end of another emotional day in court. Rohit Katru, ITV News, Cape Town.
Still to come, a new power plant in Hinckley gets the go-ahead. But what will it mean for our electricity bills?
And why NASA expects to send a British astronaut to Mars. That exclusive interview and much more when we come back. Jonathan. Welcome back. Now, Britain's first new nuclear power station since the mid-1990s was given European approval today. EDF Energy is now clear to build the £16 billion plant at Hinkley Point in Somerset. But there's a row over the amount of taxpayers' money being used and its impact on our bills. Our business editor, Joel Hills, has more.
6 years late, but shovel-ready. The serious work at Hinkley Point could soon finally be underway. The European Commission has decided that EDF needs taxpayers' support, but it's insisted on changes to the deal with the government. It says they're significant. The government, accused of being too generous, disagrees.
It's a pretty minor change. What people were thinking was that it wouldn't go through at all, but it's gone through. I think that's backed our decision. Basically, we've got to make sure that in the next decade, as 8 of our 9 nuclear power plants go offline, if 30% of electricity that comes from coal is no longer there, we have the power stations to keep the lights on in the 2020s.
The scale of the Hinkley Point C project is enormous. The plan is it will provide 7% of the UK's electricity. The cost is vast too, £24.5 billion to build. The government has agreed to help EDF borrow the money it needs, and there's another incentive. The current market price for electricity is around £50 a unit. EDF will be guaranteed a return of £92 for every unit of electricity Hinkley C goes on to produce. The new reactor will be built next to the existing one, Hinkley B, and will be 3 times as powerful. But last night, the boss of EDF's rival, SSE, said that when the new plant is hooked up to the grid, it will add 3% to the average energy bill.
I'm always struggling to comment what my competitors are saying. And
Sure, but the point is we will pay for this, either as taxpayers or as consumers. We will pay for this. As a result of Hinkley C, bills will rise, won't they? By how much?
The bill will rise anyway on the back of the...
But by how much as a result of Hinkley C?
It depends on what will be the price of other technologies.
In Somerset, they're already training potential recruits. Hinkley C would create jobs and help deliver a lower carbon future. But one way or another, we will pick up the bill. Joel Hills, ITV News.
A US pilot had to eject from his F-15 fighter jet in Lincolnshire today. It crashed into a field during a training exercise. The US Air Force at RAF Lakenheath confirmed the pilot escaped serious injury.
And finally, the man charged with sending the first human to Mars has told ITV News that one day he expects to see a Brit land on the Red Planet.
In an exclusive interview, NASA boss Charles Bolden says getting there is so important, the future of the human race may depend upon it. He spoke to our science correspondent, Alok Jha.
He's been a Marine, an astronaut, and is the man who flew the Hubble telescope into space. Now Charles Bolden runs NASA, and his next mission is his biggest: take humanity farther than it's ever been before and land a person on Mars.
Mars is very Earth-like, or at least used to be very Earth-like. It is a planet, sister planet to Earth. It is the most likely planet in our solar system that had life at one time, may have life now, and we feel definitely can sustain life. So that's the reason we chose it.
What are the steps you need to take to get there?
Mars is really, really hard. Several things we need to do. We need to understand a little bit more about the human body and how it reacts. We need to develop more technology. We need a proving ground, and that's our moon. So we'll go back into lunar orbit with what we hope to be an asteroid or part of an asteroid and develop some of the techniques. It's incremental steps, bit by bit. We crawl, walk, run, and I think we're approaching the walk stage.
Do you imagine that British astronauts will be going to Mars as well in your plan?
I do. I expect that you will see representatives from many nations. Much of the earlier work in aeronautics was done right here in the UK. So you have always been among the leaders when it came to taking things from the unknown and making them known. And I think the UK is a perfect partner to try to venture off into the far reaches of the solar system with.
Charles Bolden thinks that getting to Mars is vital for the survival of the human race, and he wants Britain to come with him. Alok Jha, ITV News.
And that is all from us for now.
I'll be back with Charlene White for the ITV News at 10, but for now, from both of us, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.